Well, welcome to Lamber's CIA Review. My name is Garland Granger, and I want to welcome you on behalf of Lamber's and hope that over the next how many ever hours it takes us to get through this thing, that we're going to get intimately involved knowledge-wise in getting you through the CIA exam. It's one of the great joys that I have in doing this, is to know that in some small part I can help you and with your effort pass the CIA exam. Now I want to do a little introductory piece of information for you to give you some broad information before we start getting into the details of all the material. And in order to do that, let me introduce myself first to you so you'll kind of know how I got to be in front of you right now. I started teaching years ago a CPA review course with Lamber's out of Boston, Mass. And it was just CPA type stuff. I did the auditing part because when I got out of college, I basically had an undergraduate degree in business. Went back to school after working a couple of years in banking and got an MBA, but I wasn't in accounting. Didn't get into accounting until I got out of my MBA program and started going to the University of Virginia when I was working in Virginia and taking accounting classes, as many as I possibly could. Got so interested in it over a 5 or 6 year period that I moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, where I now reside, and I started working for a large CPA firm. And that's kind of how I got into accounting. Spent quite a few years doing that. And then while I was working in public accounting, was asked to teach the auditing section of the CPA review course for Lamber's in Greensboro. And then that began to expand. I had the director of internal audit with Burlington Industries at that time, the 50th largest company in the United States, wanted me to do some in-house training for his staff, then asked me if I would do a CIA review course, which I'd never done. So we began to put that together. It was so successful with them that we offered it at the Southeast Regional Meeting. Had about 700 people in attendance at the meeting, and about 80 people took this review course, and that kind of got me into the CIA review. I began through that contact to teach a live course in Boston twice a year. And over a period of years that we taught it, we more than doubled the number of CIAs in that area. It was so successful that we were written up in the Internal Auditor magazine as being one of the most successful programs in the entire United States. Now, I say that not to pat myself on the back, because I don't take much credit for it. But I think the idea was when there is someone in front of you who can give you some direction, can show you how to study and learn this material, and encourage you to do so, I think the success rate goes way up. And that's what we were doing live. Well, there's only one of me to go around, and I had so many opportunities to teach it live that finally, with Lamber's in Boston, we decided that we would do a video training course so that we could get to everybody, not just in the United States, but we have sold tapes literally all over the world. So I hope that my practical experience of doing this now for in excess of 25 years will be a benefit to you guys as you try to prepare for the exam. I think I know enough about how to do it to at least help you get prepared. So that's kind of how I got into this and how I've been doing it for all these years. Now, there are a couple of key things in order for you to be successful. And I've learned this lesson the hard way in teaching people over the years. There's a huge difference between understanding something and knowing it. You see, our job together is one simple task. All I can do for you is help you understand the material. And I think that's one of my strengths, just to help you see how it fits together, what it means, explain it, give you examples. But I cannot learn it for you. You see, knowledge is going to come as you study, work questions, study, work questions, reinforce that process, and only you can do that. So don't mistake the fact that while we're going through this, you're understanding it and saying, well, gee, I've got that information down. No, you don't. In all probability, you just understand it, and we just went over it, so it's fresh in your mind. Can you put it down and come back in a week and still get questions right? If you can, then you probably know it. But you're going to have to study and reinforce, and we'll talk about how to study and prepare yourself in just a few minutes. But I want to start by helping you understand that there's a huge difference in what you and I are doing together and what you need to be doing on your own. That's studying, getting it burned into your memory bank so that while it's all stored in random access memory, you can retrieve it sequentially as you need it. To use a little technology language, hopefully that will help you in that process. Now, as we begin this process, one of the things I think is vital for you is to have the confidence in yourself that you can get through this exam. I run into so many people who are so concerned that maybe they've been out of school a while. Maybe they haven't studied in a long time as far as the textbook type stuff for this exam. And they're a little discouraged that maybe it's passed them by. Not so. Not so. Let me tell you what it takes for you to build that self-confidence that you need. It's very simple. It's not getting yourself all hyped up. It's not self-help tapes. It's one simple thing. Knowledge builds confidence. Knowledge comes with hard work. There is no shortcut, no easy way around it, and I wish there were, because if I could simply transfer through osmosis what I know to you, I would charge a lot more money and you would pay it to save all the time and effort. But it's through that effort that you're going to feel good about what you've accomplished when you finally finish. So what I want you to be able to do with this is to say, my confidence is going to grow as I take one piece at a time. Learn it, know I can handle it on the exam, and your confidence level goes up with each successive level of knowledge until you begin to realize you can get through this exam. And don't think there's any shortcut, because there is not. Just watching my tapes, for most of you, will not get through the exam. Now, there are some of you whose backgrounds are so strong, so recent, that maybe just going through the tape is all you need. I hope there are a few of you out there, but for most people, you're going to have to commit time to preparation. And I'm going to show you some things that you can do to prepare yourself and how to do that as we begin to go through this material. So, understanding, my background, what I've done, and what you need to be doing, I think it is vital as we go through this. Now, let me explain before we get into anything about the exam how you should utilize several pieces of material that we like to use. One is this. You've got a disc, a tape of each of the parts, and we're going to look at those parts in just a minute. But you should also probably have Irv Gleim's CIA review manuals, because they'll give you additional problems. They'll expand on some of these things that maybe some of you need in greater detail. And this is how I recommend that you utilize our materials along with Gleim. Simple, like it works like this. Don't read the book initially. My recommendation is that you do this. Whatever part you want to begin with, let's just say you start with part 1. The first thing you do is you begin watching my tape. And I have lined up most of my material with Irv Gleim's book. So I'm going to do my first section. I give you a lecture. Now what I'm trying to do is this. I take all the material and distill it down to the major topics. Here's the key things. I'm really big into seeing the big picture. So I want you to see, here's the big picture topic in this unit and the key concepts. Once you've done that, then just stop the tape. Read Gleim's book, that one section. Read the material. Go through and study and say, okay, I think I understand it now. Come back to my tape and then work the questions that I will assign. Now, all the questions I'll assign will either have come from Gleim's manual, all of them come from his manual. They will either have come from those questions that he has written or from former CIA exams. Okay? So you're going to be working questions, and my goal in the way I put these questions together is to help you understand the principles and concepts you need to know, so that you can then go back and say, how did I do on those questions? I got a lot of them right. You know what that means? It means you understand the material. It does not mean that you necessarily know it, because you just went over it. So what you do is you go back and you look at the notes again. And then you work the rest of the questions in Gleim and say, now, how can I do as a final test when I do all the questions in that particular section? So you control time. You stop the tape while you're working the multiple choice questions. The tape should not keep running. We've only allowed about 10 or 15 seconds on the tape when it puts the questions on the screen for you to work. So stop it. Therefore, you can work it at your speed, which we will get into a little bit later. Work it at your speed. When you finish, turn the tape back on, and we'll continue to go over those questions. And that's the methodology that we use. And you should take one section at a time. Master it and move on to the next section. Now, you can jump around in order. If you say, the last section is the one I need the most work on, then work that last section. We'll get into that a little bit later. But you can skip around in any order that you would like, but take one at a time, master it before you go to the next section. Okay? So that's at least how I would recommend that you use the tapes. That's why watching this tape is vital before you start, because you need to understand how to utilize these materials for maximum success. And I'm going to tell you, you've got to trust me on this. I've done this for so long, tried every way in the world to help people do it, and I have found this to be the absolute best way for most people. All right, as a generalization, for most people, it's the single best way to prepare yourself. I didn't say it was easy. I didn't say it was quick, but I said it is effective. And the most important thing that you're after, folks, is to get through this exam. You just want to pass it, period. So do whatever it takes. And if you'll trust me and listen to me, I've gotten so many people through it with this program, that I know that what I'm doing works. And you just have to try it and see. Okay? So that's where we'll go with that aspect of it. Okay? Now, understanding that aspect of what you need to do, what I'm trying to do, how to use the materials, I want to now start to get into the exam. Let me put up on your monitor for just a second the 4 different parts of the exam for you to take a look at. Okay? So we'll pull those up. These are the 4 parts, because I always get the question, which part should I take? Should I take them all? What do they cover? Let's run through them quickly. The first part is the internal audit activities role in governance, risk, and control, which, by the way, are the 3 major things after Sarbanes-Oxley, after the new standards that we have put into place to make them international for the Institute of Internal Auditors. The 3 major areas that we cover: governance, particularly risk, and control. Part 2, conducting the internal audit engagement. That's the actual application, hands-on. How do we do it? How do we report on it? Part 3, business analysis and information technology. We've moved a lot of the accounting, all of the accounting, from financial to managerial, the finance part. This is a heavy, heavy-duty part. And then Part 4, business management skills, which, by the way, in this particular part, there are exemptions for particular certifications. If you're a CPA, a CISA, if you will go to the Institute's website, at theiia.org, that's where you look it up, www.theiia.org, they have on there all the different certifications, updated constantly, that will now substitute for Part 4. You might not even have to take Part 4, depending on what certification you have. So these are the 4 parts of the exam. Okay, with that in mind, then let's begin to take you through your basic structure. We'll go nice and slow so you can catch all of this stuff and it makes sense. The exam is given all day Wednesday and Thursday in May and in November. And it's 3.5 hours for each part. 125 multiple choice questions. No essay. So here's the good news. For every question given, there's an answer. Here's the bad news. You got to get it right. You can't write an essay and get partial credit for getting part of it right. The problem with an objective question is it's either right or it is wrong, and it's extremely objective. It's all machine graded. So you don't write anything anymore like you used to, and so you just realize going into every part, if I say there's 125 multiple choice questions, and I've got literally 210 minutes, 3.5 hours, that works out to be 1.4 minutes per question. Now that's going to go by pretty fast, but I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to control your time, manage that time to effectively finish the exam without feeling stressed and to have time to review. We'll get into that in just a few seconds. Now, when the exam is given and it's all machine graded, one of the things you need to note about each area as you prepare is we used to have 3 different levels of testing. We now have 2. And I will give you in each of the 4 sections at the very beginning the content specifications from the Institute. But one of the great things they do, and by the way, this is in the back of Irv Gleim's manuals, every one of them, has the content specifications. It tells you not just the topics that will be covered, but the weight given. And it'll normally say 20 to 30%. Well, that means that the average could be 25. You may get as low as 20, you may get as high as 30. But it will also tell you which of the 2 levels is being tested. The highest level is called proficiency. That is, I must know the information, be able to analyze that information, and apply it as I would in my day-to-day routine activities as an internal auditor. You're going to find that most all the topics in parts 1 and 2 are at the proficiency level because those 2 parts relate more to our day-to-day job than parts 3 and 4. When you get to parts 3 and 4, you're going to find a lot more at what we call the lowest level or lower level, which is the awareness level. That is, I know the terms, I know the definitions of the terms with a little application, but I don't use this stuff every day. There's a big difference. Proficiency, I can manipulate it, analyze it, know what to do with it. But at the awareness level, I don't need the same depth. So you don't have to learn it at the same level that you do in the other parts. Now, part 4 is all awareness level now, okay? And most of part 3, but not 1 and 2. So it's very important that you go to those content specifications as you're studying and say, what level do I need to know? Really detailed with application or just definitions, terms, and concepts? Now, you're going to find that as I take you through the material, if it's at a proficiency level, we're going to take you to that level. And if it's at the awareness level, you'll be able to figure it out because all the questions will kind of be definitions and terms and a little application. Very basic application as you go through it. Okay? So that's important that you understand the structure when the exam is given and what levels of knowledge and percentage weight given to each of the topics. All of that is in the content specifications, which I will give you and which also will be at the end of Gleim's manuals. Okay, now, let's suppose you take the exam, and we'll get into all those details, but let's suppose you take the exam. It's just a grade sheet, and you're going to fill it out with the 125 multiple choice questions answered, and it's going to be scanned in a machine and machine graded. Okay? What does it take to pass? Well, the exam is now on a sliding scale, and it's graded based on 250 points to 750, and you need 600 to pass. Now, in reality, this is a 75. That's never changed. It's basically a 75. But the exam is curved. If it's very, very difficult and people don't do extremely well, that scale slides a little bit. So you could pass without a pure 75% of the questions right. If it's very, very difficult, very, very easy, you may have to get exactly 75% to pass. But that scale will be a sliding scale that they will determine at the Institute. Now, grades are normally mailed out July the 15th for the May exam and January 15th for the November exam. And when your grades come, you're going to see one of 3 things, possibly. If you've already taken a part and passed it, it will tell you that, previously taken. If you've taken a part and passed it, it won't give you a grade. It'll say passed. Listen, when you get that passed, you won't care what your grade is. You'll just be excited. If you do not pass, it'll give you a number. It may say 526. Well, you needed to get 600, so you know you missed it by that number of points. Now, you don't know exactly how many multiple choice questions you missed, but you do know, hey, I got close, or I really have a long way to go in my preparation. So the further you are from 600, the more work you need to do, and the closer, hey, you're getting there. You just need to master maybe a little bit better a few of the skills that you didn't learn. So that is the grading as it takes place, okay? So they'll let you know when that grade comes out how you did in the exam. Now, what I want to spend more time talking about is how do we get you prepared? how do you take the exam? Are there some key things that you need to know in the process of doing that? Well, let me start with this one before we do anything. People will say, well, Garland, should I take all 4 parts? Should I just take, because you can take one part at a time. It's not mandatory that you take all 4. So how many parts should I take? And I normally answer this way. How much time do you have? How much time do you have? If you have tons of time to prepare, shoot for all 4. Then you may not end up taking all 4. Shoot for all 4. But if you have a family, a lot of family commitments, young kids or older kids or whatever, your job is demanding, you have some outside activities that you can't get out from under, don't be so aggressive. Back off and say, 1, I need to keep my sanity in this process, and maybe I just take one part at a time. Now, it's obviously going to be expensive to do that, but hey, you got to weigh getting through this exam with everything else. Okay? So I may say, I think I'm going to try for 2 parts. And if you have to back off, if time becomes a problem, all right, I'm going to do first 2 parts. I'll start with part 1. If I run out of time, fine, I'll take part 1. If I have time, I will keep going. I like to set my sights high, and if I have to, I'm willing to back down. Rather than say, oh my gosh, I wish I had taken more parts, I really had the time to study, and I didn't allocate my time wisely. I try to say, start and see what you can do. What are you capable of handling? And if you can't, then you back down. But the most important thing is passing. Now, the way the exam is going to work is you take a part, pass, you've got 2 years. But that 2 years gets extended every time you take the exam and pass another part. Then they extend that period of time. So you want to try to take it every time it's offered, if you have to, so that your limit doesn't run out on you, but you can get through it. Whether it's one exam at a time, 1 part at a time, or 2 and 2, or maybe all 4. That's up to you, and you've got to really take a very hard look at how much free time you have. And when we talk about studying, I think that will help you. Hang on a second, I dropped my notes. I think that will help you decide, well, how much time do I have in a given week to do this, okay? So you determine, how much you think you can do. Now, which parts should you take? If you're going to take individual parts, is a different issue. I normally tell most people, start with parts 1 and 2. Shoot for those 2 parts. And the reason is there's tremendous overlap between the 2 because they both relate to what you do as an internal auditor. There are a lot of the standards about managing everything in the first part and then how to do the engagement in the second. But there's tremendous overlap. So if I were going to start with just 2 parts, I'd go for 1 and 2. If you have to back down, you either do 1 or you do 2, the part you feel most comfortable with. Start with those 2 parts. Part 3 is by far the most difficult part time-wise to study for. I think I broke mine up into like 16 sections. I tried to give it to you in little bite-sized pieces because I find people can do better. The accounting part can be very large. So I said, let's break it down into bite-sized pieces. Did the same with managerial, the same with finance, and the same with the information technology because you seem to manage that easier and you feel like you're making progress rather than giving you massive amounts of data. But it will take a lot of time to get through part 3. Part 4, I think, is a breeze. Not easy, but you can get through it very, very quickly. But I think getting through 1 and 2, and then 3, and then 4 could be a nice way to package it. Go for those first 2, and then go for the last 2. Okay? At least that's my recommendation if you're not going to go for all 4. I like going for all 4, but also like keeping my sanity, and I like keeping my marriage together and my family happy. So that's kind of an important balance for you to have in your life. Well, let's talk about preparation. How in the world do I begin to find the time to study? Well, time management becomes important. But as I say in one of the sections, when we talk about time management is not managing your time. Time management is managing yourself. And what I found I had to do in preparing for the exam, both the CPA and the CIA exam, because I'm one of each, I got both of those designations. I was married and I had young kids at home at the time. And I'm working. And I found I had to get up early in the morning and maybe spend 30, 45 minutes before I started getting dressed. I'd find 15 minutes every day at lunch where I'd take my book with me and I'd work multiple choice questions. I had Glime's books back then. I'd work a few multiple choice questions. 15 minutes, I can do 15 questions. Multiply that, every day, and it starts to add up. I'd come home at night. I'd have dinner. I'd spend some time with the family, and then maybe later, here's another hour, hour and a half. Weekends, I'd try to take Saturday mornings or Sunday afternoons. Find those times, but here's the key: every day. I've had people say, I'm just going to wait for the weekend, and I'm going to spend all weekend studying. No, you're not. That's a lie. You're fooling yourself. You're going to burn out if you do that. Okay? So you can't keep absorbing but so much material. We know that you absorb and retain information best. This is how your brain works. During the day, you're putting information into memory. When you go to sleep at night, we know that your brain has a filing system that it then begins to operate on while you're sleeping. And it's taking everything that you've processed, everything you've learned, and it starts filing it away. Well, if you stay up too late, if you cram too much information into the filing system and you're not getting enough sleep, we know the information is not filed properly. And it's kind of like over here in this dump file, and it never gets processed the way it should. So trying to cram too much in your head at one time makes it virtually impossible to retrieve it because your brain has not stored it so that it can be retrieved. There's no retrieval process there. It works better to do lots of small times than a bunch of great big times. We know that. It's been studied and tested over and over. So break it up into little bits and pieces, 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Get up and take a breather. But you must schedule time every single day. If you got to take a day off, fine. Don't feel guilty. But don't wait to the last minute. Don't try to cram it. Most people who do that are not successful. I can just tell you from experience of doing this for all these years, most people will tell me when they don't pass, well, I waited too late, and I tried to study all this stuff the last few weeks, and I just couldn't get it out. That's why. There's a physical and mental reason that you can't do that. So I need to set up a schedule. I actually recommend that you write it down. You put it on a piece of paper. Every week, line that out and say, barring emergencies, barring something changing, leave me alone during these times. I will be studying. So I don't fill those times with stuff that's meaningless. You've got to pay the price. You've got to discipline yourself. And for a period of time, you've got to put all the things you love to do on the shelf if this exam means anything to you. You see, you're going to find out a lot about yourself. If it really doesn't mean anything to you, you're going to find every excuse in the world not to study. But if it's important to you, you will discipline yourself. And you will have incredible joy when you finally get through it in knowing that you did it. Nobody did it for you. There were no shortcuts. You earned it. So line out the time. Now, I also recommend that as you do this, in each section you may do it differently. I normally say start with the biggest sections tested. That's why content specification can be important. Okay? If you got plenty of time, then work from section 1 right through the end of the material. But if not, go to the material first, where you are the weakest. And I'll tell you why. As time goes by, you're going to get tired. You don't want to save the difficult stuff for last, because you're going to be mentally and physically fatigued. Do the tough stuff first, because I'll tell you what will happen. When you master the tough stuff, like stat sampling in part 2, say, I haven't done that in years, remember nothing. Do it first. Get it done, because when you do, what do you think happens to your confidence? It starts going up. It keeps going up. Every time you master the difficult stuff. And leave the easy stuff for the tail end. Now, you have to figure out for you what's easy or difficult. Look at the topics. What do you know about it? How long has it been since you've had it? Do you know anything? And you can begin to evaluate that. Now, if you've got the time, just start working one right through. If you know you're going to get through it, if you're not sure you're going to get all the material covered like you would like, then I recommend you do it the way I just said. Now, what I normally recommend is this, and I think you'll find Irv will do the same thing. I normally recommend that you spend about 3 to 4 hours on each of the sections. That works out to about 40 hours. for each part. Now, that's a lot of time. But I also say this, part of your study time, all right, in that 40 hours is what you're doing with me. Because remember, you're understanding it. It won't take you that long to reinforce it. So you can kind of include in that 40 hours the time that you're spending with me on this tape getting prepared. Now, that's a lot of time, I admit, and some of you can do it in less. Some of you may take more, but I normally find if you put 40 hours into each part, odds of you passing are extremely high. You know, the exam is now closed, and that means you don't ever get to see old exams. But prior to the exam closing, the pass rate on each part was averaging for 20-some years about 45%. So that means about 1 out of every 2 people will pass. You just want to be one of the 2. Then prepare more than the opposition. And if you do, you ought to be one of the top 2. That's all you want to be. 1 out of every 2 people should pass each of the parts. So I recommend budgeting your time, having a written schedule, and do it every week because it can vary. Put in when you're going to study and then stick to it. Check it off when you've done it. Have a plan. I'm going to take these sections so I can see when I'm going to get it done to know how long it's going to take. The other thing I normally recommend is this. About once every 2 weeks, go back through the material you've already covered. Just read the notes. Just read the notes. Keep it fresh. We know that the more you go over that material, you reinforce the filing process and the retrieval process. So every 2 weeks, take a little bit of time and just go back through and read the notes and keep it fresh in your mind. All right? And I find that to be extremely helpful as you go through this process. Okay? Now, right now, I want to give you, I think, some very, very helpful ways to get through multiple choice exam. This is all multiple choice. So I'm going to show you about 18 or 20 examples of multiple choice questions, techniques used to test these questions, and what you need to look for as you read them. Now, the cool thing about multiple choice is there are 4 answers, find the right one. And that sounds easy. See, and you've got a 25% chance of getting it right if you just do a blind guess. But you're going to be doing educated guesses, okay? With knowledge, you should do very, very well. So let's talk about how to take multiple choice tests. A lot of people hate them. I'm not a big fan of multiple choice questions. Sometimes they can be very confusing. Sometimes I know the material and I can't figure out what the question is saying. But there are some techniques. Now, before I show you some various techniques that can be asked, there's something you need to understand. No matter how they ask the question, there is absolutely no substitute for knowledge. There are going to be a lot of questions that there's not a technique to it. It's just the standards require what for planning. The standards require what for this. You have to say this in the report. You just flat out have to know facts. They are factual questions, testing right from the standards, right from the material, right from the definitions. There's no gimmick to it. Nothing more than that. And that's an awful lot of the questions. But then around those, and the way they do it, are some techniques that have been used for years with multiple choice questions. And I just want to make you aware of how to read them and what to do. Now, I normally recommend that as you look at a multiple choice question, you think about it like this. And this doesn't work on every question, but it does for most. There's what we call the stem of the question. That's the body of information before they give you the answers. And it's important that you try to figure out, what is this question about? You see, a multiple choice question tests one concept, one idea. And you have to frame that question properly in order to have a chance of getting it right. What was this question about? How do I approach the answers? But you've got to figure that out. Now, I recommend you get a highlighter. Get a yellow highlighter, your favorite color. And as you're working questions in my manual, as you work them in Gleim, look for the key concepts. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. Underline them, because what that's forcing you to do is to read intently. Remember, 1.4 minutes is not a whole lot of time to get through that question. Okay? So you've got to be able to spend your time wisely to get through that question, to figure out what it's about, and to try to get the correct answer without guessing. Okay? So let me show you. And I've copied these so you'll understand. I just copied these on a sheet of paper. I have a machine that we use called an Elmo that will allow me just to throw it up on the screen. And I've tried to blow them up so you can look at them. I'm not interested in giving you the answer to the questions. The answers are irrelevant. I'm interested in showing you techniques and what to do with each of these techniques. So let me show you one technique used. Here's a question. Let's read it together. The best control over the work on which internal auditors' opinions are based is. Now, let me underline a key word or two for you. The first one is this, the best. A lot of times when you see this type of question and it says the best, you may have 4 really good answers. But the question said, which is the best of those answers? So you have to sort through it saying, what is the bigger picture? Right, in this situation. And so I'm looking for maybe several very good answers, all right, in those in situations, but what is the best? Now that's the first word. Now the second is, well, what's the question about? The best what? And I would be using the highlighter. Control over the work on which our opinions are based. So we're saying, we do our audit work and we give an opinion on our work. What's the best control over that? Supervisory review of all work engagements, preparation of time budgets, preparation of engagement working papers, staffing of internal auditors. Okay? And you come back and say, well, what's the best answer? Does that make sense? See, and I know they're looking, all of these things are good, but is it the best control over the work on which our opinion is based? You see what I'm after? Not an answer. I'm not even going to give you the answers to these questions. Don't care. I want you to see how to frame the question. That's one way that it's given. Okay? Now, here's another way. This is an opposite question. Reasonable assurance should be obtained as to each prospective internal auditor's qualifications and proficiency. Which of the following is the least useful application of this principle? Here's a key word. Least. Least. You see, they can ask for the best, they can ask for the least. So you can go in either direction. And then you've got to back up and say, now, what was this question about? It says, which of the following is the least useful application of this principle? What principle? Well, they just gave you. Reasonable assurance should be obtained. Not perfect, but we'll go over this when you do the material. As to each prospective internal auditor's qualifications, there's a key word, and proficiency. Okay, I'm qualified and I know how to do it. Okay, so what's the least useful application? And then I begin to look at these answers. And you will learn these as you go. What I'm trying to get you to do is to frame the question properly. So you'll see a lot of questions that will say, what is the best answer? You may have 4 good ones. One is the best. And then you'll have one that says the least. So there are 2 different ways that they can go with that question. Okay? Now here's another basic question I like. One of the primary roles of the engagement work program is to, now here's the key word, primary. Primary roles. Primary objective. Whenever they give you that word, primary means the number 1 role. Now the role of what? The engagement work program. The audit program. What is the primary role? And then you begin to read the answers to the question. Okay? But now I know what they're after. They may give me, and they generally, a lot of secondary roles. Look, serve as a tool for planning and conducting audit engagements. Does it do that? Yes. Document our evaluation of controls. Yes. Provide for a standardized approach to the engagement. Yes. Assess the risk associated with the activity under review. Yes. You say, well, gosh, they're all right. That's true. They're all good. But what is the primary role? You see? And that's what you will learn as we go through the material. So when they give you this type of question, this is what I want you to be aware of. They normally give you 4 good roles. So they all sound good. If they gave you 3 that were completely off the wall, it wouldn't be too hard to find the right one. So they're going to give you 4 good answers, but you've got to find the number 1 reason we have a work program. We teach you that. Okay? That's another way to give that question. Here we go with another one. Okay? An operational engagement related to the production function includes a procedure to compare actual costs with standard. The purpose of this engagement, there's the key word. Now let me tell you what that word is. Why? Why did we do that? Well, why did we do what? We're doing an operational engagement, which we talk about. You'll learn what that means. To the production function. So we're looking at production. Includes the procedure. Here's what it does. It compares actual with standard. Now, what is the purpose of that comparison in the production function? The purpose, the reason, okay, is why do we do it? All right? There's another way they can ask a question. All right? Here's a goodie. One of the main reasons that implementation of a total quality management program works better through the use of teams is. Okay? All right? So that's, again, it's another way of asking. The purpose, the main reason, and then you begin to say, now what is it we're looking for? Implementation of TQM, total quality management, works better through teams. That's what it's all about. So I kind of frame the question, and then I begin to look at the answers. Okay? That's another way of doing it. All right? Well, let's take a look at this question. Internal auditing is unique in its scope, often encompasses all areas of an organization. Thus, it's not possible for each internal auditor to possess detailed competence in all areas that might be subject to engagements. Which of the following competencies is required of every internal auditor? Now, let me tell you what that means. It means without exception. Whenever they say required, okay, notice that word is required. It means never an exception. If you can find one exception in here, okay, like we don't all, you'll learn, have to be proficient in technology, okay? We don't all have to be proficient in accounting principles. So if you know that, if you learn those, you'll understand they're asking something from the standards that says, what are you required to do? That is a rule without exception. So watch for those words. That always tells me, if I can think of one exception, that's not an answer. Not an answer. Here's another one. Which of the following statements is an appropriate reason for the internal auditor not to participate? Now, I'm looking for a reason, but here's the critical word. Not. That changes everything. So what it means is this, and I want you to think like this. It means 3 of the reasons are appropriate. 1 is not. Okay? Think like that. If it gives you a negative, you say, look, that means 3 are okay, but 1 is not. Look for the one that is not. Look for that word and circle it. Critical word. Or you might see this. The internal audit activity can perform an important role in preventing and detecting significant fraud by being assigned all but which one of the following tasks. You see the idea? You got to catch that. All but. That means I'm going to do 3 things. 1 I'm not going to do. And then you go back and read the question, what was it about? In preventing and detecting fraud. Okay? That's the concept. That's the area, the topic in which it's talking. But I got to make sure I get the right picture. It's all but which one? 1 is not included. You see the idea? Another way that they can just phrase it to make it work. Here's another one. The purpose of the standards includes all except. See? Watch those kind of questions. All except. Here's a different technique I want you to see. From the perspective of the internal audit activity, which of the following facts by themselves could contribute to a lack of independence? So this question is about a lack of independence. And then they give me answers. And they want you to pick 1 only, 2 only, 2 and 3 only, 1, 2, and 3. So what you have to do is to read these and say, each one of these, would that contribute to a lack of independence? And if yes, check it off. And then you can find the correct answer. So one of the techniques is like selecting. It can be all of them. It can be none of them. You know, whatever they give you as an option. This is a favorite technique on the exam, particularly when there are lots of options or maybe 4 steps to do something. You know, which one of these would be in those steps? That is a way to give you that question. Now, here's another way to give you the question, and I'm going to have to scan this out just a little bit here for a second so I can get it all on the screen for you. All right, and I may still not get it all there. But it gives you a list, and it says, before internal auditors begin to offer consulting services to an organization, a number of things need to happen within the organization. Which answer choice lists the following items in the order that they should be performed in. Now, here's one where you've got to say, put them in order. See, which comes first, second, or third. Now, I always say, here's some other key words, the word before. Before you begin, not after you begin, before you ever start, what are some things you need to do? Well, this is just something you have to learn in the material. And then they're going to ask you to rank it. 1, 2, 3, how do they go? Okay? Another technique used. Here's a good technique that they like to use. So let me zoom this one back in a little bit for you here. Okay? So you can read it. All right, there we go. When the economic order quantity decision model is employed, and I hate these kind of questions, the list A are being offset or balanced by the list B. Now, let me show you how I approach this. I'm going to read this question 4 times until it makes sense. Watch what's going to happen. When the economic order quantity decision model is employed, the ordering costs are being offset or balanced by the carrying cost. Is that true or not? When the economic order quantity decision model is employed, the purchase costs are being offset by the carrying costs. In other words, I read this thing 4 times, and each time plugging in these words to see which one makes sense to me based upon what I know. Now, you can't get this question right if you don't have knowledge of EOQ. But if you do, then as you read it, it will begin to fit in what you know. All right? So that is a common type question. Read it 4 times. And each time, plug in the 2 words as if it's a complete sentence. Another technique that you can use. All right? Here's one. Is PERT analysis a control tool or a planning tool? And it can be a yes or no. Now, I tell you what I find very helpful. If you know one of them and you say, yeah, I know it's a planning tool. Well, guess what? If you know that, these 2 answers are out. And now, you've got a 50-50 chance. You see, if you got to guess, if you can get one of these type questions, you automatically increase your odds to 50-50 because they're going to use the 4 combinations. You know, no, 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 yes, 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 no. And once you can figure one of them, you got a chance at getting the other one. Even if you don't know it, you got a 50-50 shot. All right? Now, I hope you know both of them. But if not, that's the way to approach that problem. Okay? Well, let me show you this one. The reason I wanted to at least help you identify. Groupthink is defined as the tendency to conform and ignore relevant input that is at variance with the majority option. The guidance of groups based upon self-standards of performance. The member of a group developing a solution after all, this is a key word to watch for, all relevant information has been considered. Well, do you as an auditor ever have all the relevant information? You see, that is a word. I'm not saying it's not an answer because I've seen a few where it is. But it normally is in accordance with the standards. This is a word that's normally exclusive from an answer to say, wait a minute, we don't all have all the information. Right? Just don't do it. Or to go back to a question that we did earlier. Here's another takeoff on that same word. Employee motivation is always higher for team members than for individuals. Is it? Every time without exception? You mean there's never an exception? So the 2 words, all and always, are words that generally make me very, very suspicious, not an answer. Because there's not much in what we do that's always going to be done this way. That's all the information. And so I have a tendency to look, askance at those and say, I got a feeling that's not the answer if I'm not sure. All right? And very rarely is it ever an answer. Well, here's another exclusive word. Okay, here's a question. and I would zoom this back out a little bit here to give it to you. All right? The chief audit executive routinely presents an activity report to the board. Senior management is asked to review the presentation before board meetings so that issues or questions can be discussed. The CAE should. Now, I put this up here because I want you to see the answers. Okay? And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit on these answers for you, all right? Because there's a key word. Provide the activity report to senior management as requested. Discuss any issues that may require action. Withhold disclosure of the activity report to senior management because such matters are the sole province of the board. Well, both of those could be right. Disclose to the board only. There's an exclusive word again. Provide senior management only to. You see, that word only is also rarely, if ever, an answer because it's too limiting in what we do. And as internal auditors, there are a lot of options in what we do and how we do it and who we give it to. And to say you can only do this means always, always only do it this way. They're not answers, folks. I'm telling you now. Throw them out, okay? Now, this last question I'm going to give you is extremely lengthy. And I'm not probably going to get the whole thing up here at one time. So I want you to see what happens. I'm going to first of all show you a key thing. When you have a problem that's very lengthy, let me show you what the typical exam taker will do. They'll read it. You'll come all the way down. And then they get to the last. Which of the following is an appropriate action for the CAE to take regarding the questionable item? Well, by the time you've read this, you've got to realize something. You have no clue what the question is about when you start. None whatsoever. So you begin to read it, and you're beginning to fill in the blanks as you go. Would it not make more sense in a question like this to start with the last sentence before you ever begin? Because what will happen? You'll read it trying to figure out what the question is. Then you'll reread it for content. Then you may reread it again to see if did you really understand it. That's 3 readings. You have 1.4 minutes. And that's fairly lengthy, and you haven't even looked at the answers. To save time, this is what I recommend. Read the last sentence. If there's a lot of information in the stem of the question, go immediately, because this is what I know. Which of the following is an appropriate action for the CAE to take regarding the questionable item? So I'm looking for an action. So what's the questionable item? Now as I read it, I know what it's about. My attention is focused on solving this questionable item. I can read it once and then begin to look at the answers. And if I get confused, I can go back to it. All right? So that's a very, very lengthy question, and that's how I normally recommend that you do it when the stem is lengthy. Sometimes in a question, I will go back. I'll give you an example we had earlier, and I'll say, read it like this. Groupthink is defined as, and read the answer. Groupthink is defined as, and read the answer. Because this is short. Groupthink is defined as, so that you put a whole sentence together. Because when you do that, it's refreshing your memory what this question is about. And it's not like you've got to read 4 or 5 lines. Groupthink is defined as the tendency to conform. Groupthink is defined as the guidance of groups based upon. You see what I'm saying? Very, very simple process that you go through in order to do that. Okay? So there are some techniques that you look for. My primary thing is always to say, what is this question about? Okay? Sometimes they'll give you like 2 parts to a question. They'll say you're looking for a preventive, and I think we had one, and detective. So you've got 2 things to look for. Not just preventive or detective, but both. So I'm always trying to read the question to say, what is the question about before I go any further? Hope that makes some sense. Look for those techniques as you work questions. See if you can apply those principles, and you'll get very, very good at working those questions. Okay? On top of just the knowledge-based questions that you have to have. Okay? Well, what about the exam itself? What about taking the exam? How do you dress? What do you do? What do you bring? And how do I just physically go about this process? Are there any keys to it? And I say yes, there are. One is this. Every location is different. It's given all over the world, and every location is different. But I normally say dress comfortably. Dress layered. You may be in a place that's cold one minute, and then it's hot the next. Turn on the air blows, and then they cut it off and it gets warm. So take something layered. If you're cold-natured or hot-natured, you can take it off easily, put it back on. Okay? A sweater, a little jacket, whatever. Now, you are allowed to take number 2 pencils and a non-programmable, non-printable calculator. It should add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Some locations even provide the calculators for you. They'll tell you that when they send you the information. Put it in a plastic baggie. If you want to take some munchies, take them. I normally recommend that whatever you take, it's free of sugar. Sugar, we know, is a mental retardant. There have been all kinds of studies in blind groups where they don't know what they're taking. They drink a drink. It's either with or without sugar, and then given a test. And invariably, within minutes after drinking, if it's got sugar in it, the people that had the sugar do anywhere from 15 to 20% worse on the exam than the people who had no sugar whatsoever. Sugar is a mental retardant. It's only temporary, but it's temporary enough that it can hurt you a few questions on the exam, and you do not want that to happen. So, take grapes. That's a natural sugar. It's not a processed or refined sugar. Take something if you want to munch on it, but don't take sugar. Stay away from that. So take your little plastic baggie so they can see, and take those things, and that's all you need to take with you to the exam, and then dress in a layered fashion. Now, I'm going to tell you from my experience a way to take this exam. You have 125 questions. Start reading. And what I do is this. I have a ranking system that I do on multiple choice questions. It's either a 1, it's a 2, or it's a 3. And I literally write it on that question, right up beside the number, 1, 2, or 3. Now let me define for you what each of those are. A 1, I know the answer. I am so sure I got this thing right. It's just like a question I had earlier. I know this material. I know the answer's right. I circle it. I got that one. And I put a 1 beside it. Now, I could have missed it. I understand that. But I feel very confident I got it right. Well, I get to the next question, and I say, well, I know A is not the answer. That's got the word always in it. I know that's not an answer. And I know D is not the answer. It's either B or C. I'm not sure which it is. Put a 2 and leave it. Just leave it. Now you say, well, why leave it? Why not go ahead and resolve it? I'll tell you why. Particularly in parts 1 and 2. This information is so interconnected. You're a little nervous going into the exam. And as you start to work, what people find is all this data, if you filed it properly, starts coming to the surface. And suddenly you read a question that triggers that material. And bam, it comes back to you. So don't try to answer it now. Get rid of the answers you know to be wrong, whether it's 1 answer or 2 answers. Leave it. Mark those out. Come back to it later. Okay? Don't waste time now. Now, what is a 3? A 3 is 2 types of questions to me. 1, I don't have a clue what the answer is. Now look, all the questions count the same. I'm not going to waste my time on a question I don't know. Now, it's not that I'm going to leave it blank, but right now I'm not going to waste my time. And up on the screen, I'm going to put the other example. This is a question I skipped. Remember this one? Very, very lengthy, very, very time-consuming. You know what? It counts the same as every other question. I may know it, but I'm not going to waste my time on it. Because if I spend too much time on this one and I can't get to 3 other questions, what did I gain if I got it right? I still missed 3 other questions because I couldn't get to them. So I skip it and I put a 3. Now, I have a little thing I do, a 3-1 and a 3-2. 1 is something I may know. A 2 is the 3 I don't know. Because there's a big difference. When I come back, you can do 3s and 4s. I don't care how you do it. But you want to designate. There is a difference between one that I don't have a clue and one that's just lengthy. So if you want to use a 3 for, this is a long one and I think I could come back to it, and then a 4 for I don't know, all right, don't answer them. So when you go through all 125 questions, and you should be watching your clock, how long did that take? The only questions you should have answered are your 1s. Now, hopefully, you got a high percentage of those. I hope you got at least 50% of those questions. These are number 1s. Okay? Now what do? Well, I run back and I do my 2s. Because hopefully now a lot of this data has been floating around, coming to the surface. Now I go back and I reread the question. And I start thinking, now, which is the better answer? Let's suppose you've eliminated 2 answers. And you got it down to B or C. And I normally ask people, what do you think your odds are getting it right? And they say 50-50. I go, no. I think it's 75-25. Now, I can't prove that except in my own life. And I'll tell you why I think your odds are higher. You're not making a blind guess. 50-50 is an absolutely uneducated blind guess. You are making an educated guess. And when you get down to 2 answers with an educated guess, I think you ought to get a much higher percentage right. I think you ought to get close to 75% of those questions right. Somewhere between 50 and 100. Midpoint, I pick. Okay? So if you have 2s, hopefully you'll get 3 of every 4 of those right because you're making an educated guess. Then I go back and do the lengthy questions, the ones that I may know, okay, but I'm not going to waste my time with. I go back and do the lengthy questions. And last, what do? I go back and do the ones I don't have a clue. You see, if you run out of time, what can you always do on those? Go guess. You're going to be guessing anyway. But I say don't blindly guess. Look at the answers. And I try to do this with the ones I don't know anything about. Are there 3 answers that sound similar? Have something in common? I go with the other one. Now, if they're definitions, that's a tough one to do. I read it and say, well, if it's a definition, what word describes? You know, we always give in our business, we give names to things descriptive of what they do or represent or how they work. So I look and say, what name sounds like what they just gave me? So it's not a blind guess. Right? I try to educate. If I see the word always or only or all, I throw those out. And every time you get an answer out, even if you're guessing, the odds go up. So don't just blindly guess. But the neat part is, if you had to, and you were running out of time, you could go through and fill them in. Never, ever leave a multiple choice question blank. They do not take off. I've always said they grade this exam with a plus key only on the calculator. There's no taking away for wrong answers. If you leave it blank, it's wrong. Never can get it right leaving it blank. Okay? So to me, that's a very logical approach. And I'm always watching my watch. How much time do I have to do these? Should I run through these quickly or do I have time to slow down? Okay? Now the last part is this. All the questions are answered. Okay? All filled in on the grade sheet. And I've still got 25 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. What do? Well, I'm going to go back through and reread some questions. I'm going to try to go through them quickly just to see, did I misread something? Here's my basic concept. When do you change an answer? And I think because I've been doing this so long, I came up with this very simple process. The answer is never change an answer unless you are 100% convinced you misread the question or misread the answer. See, you're normal. If you studied and prepared, your gut, intelligent feel for that answer is generally going to be right. Okay? It's probably right. And unless I can say, oh my gosh, I misinterpreted, I misread it, I didn't pick up the word not, I don't change an answer. Ever. I leave it, go to it. How many times I have seen people erase an answer from the right one to the wrong one. And I say, why did you do that? Well, I got to thinking about the question. No, I don't want you thinking about it. I want you to say, well, I misinterpreted the question. See, but when you start trying to read too much in a question, and that's what happens, you change it. Never, ever change it unless you are convinced, as I said, misread, misinterpreted, whatever. Okay? Don't change your answers. Well, I don't know what else to tell you, folks. I hope we got you ready to go. I hope I've got you a little excited. That technique is not going to get you through this exam. But one thing I do know is technique can help you pick up a few points. Because just by learning how they test does not mean I know the information. Without knowledge, all the technique in the world is not going to help you pass. But with knowledge, technique may help you better approach questions, to understand them, how to approach them, how to save time, okay, as you go through that process. All right? What you want to do when you're studying at home, try to do every multiple choice question that I assign you in 1 minute. Kind of look at your watch. I put up on the screen, do questions 1 through 15. Then say 15 minutes. All right, go. See if you can do it in 15 minutes. Because if it's taking you 30 minutes, you don't have 30 minutes to do it on exam. Shoot for doing it 1 minute per question. What you'll find is you'll do it in less. Because I want you to see you can do them in under a minute and still have time to come back and review and to spend it. But it's going to be tight. All right? It's going to be tight. Now, if you know the material and you can fly through it and you got a lot of ones, time will not be an issue. But if you got a lot of 2s and 3s, time is going to be an issue. If you read slowly, time is going to be an issue. You must practice picking up your speed. Reading without distraction, what I call reading intently, looking at every word, looking for key words. When they put a word in there, don't think it's there by accident. That little word but, not, all, always, only, they're there for reasons. Primary, except for, those words are there. Understand them. Look for them. Underline as you go. What's the key concept? Because remember, every multiple choice, test one concept. Well, I'm pumped. I hope you are. I'm ready to get us started. And I hope that if you'll do what I tell you and you'll stick with it, I hope that I'll be getting an email from you or a phone call saying, hey, I got my grades, and guess what? I am now a certified internal auditor. There is a great satisfaction that comes upon you when you reach that designation. And it puts you a cut above, all right, every other internal auditor who's not certified. Not that we're into status, but it just makes you more respected as a professional than if you do not have it. Put it down as a goal. Put it down as a priority. Put everything on the shelf except your family and your job. They have to come first and second in whatever order you'd like to put them in. All right? But they have to be there. But beyond that, all other personal things I do, I can put on the shelf temporarily until I get through this exam. Because here's the good part. Once you pass it, you're a CIA as long as you want to be. As long as you keeping your continuing ed up to speed and paying your dues, folks, you will be a certified internal auditor and all that goes with that. Well, I wish you luck, and I hope, and by the way, that's a bad saying, I wish you luck, all right? Because it's not just luck, it's skill. I ought to say I wish you skill, I wish you knowledge, I wish you discipline. But I'm hoping that if you'll do it, and you do as I tell you to, I'm hoping I will hear from you, that you were successful. And that will make me feel extremely good. Okay? We'll go to it. I look forward to working with you.